Hello, my name is Hakon and welcome back to my channel where today I have a little kind of vlog, or perhaps I should call it a channel update for you. Because for any one of you who has been following my channel the last several years, you will have noticed that the frequency of new videos coming out has gone down. Sometimes it's gone up and down a bit. It has varied quite a bit, and there are of course different reasons for this. And to summarize the reasons for this, is that making videos is, as any of you who are also YouTubers will know, it is an enterprise that requires time, energy, and creativity. Now, some of my videos, of course, are music improvisational performances, and of course that is something I can do while just doing the music, so that doesn't require any additional energy really beyond the actual making of the music, so that doesn't really sort of count so much towards the effort otherwise needed to make videos. But then there are videos that require talking about a subject, to talk about whether it's books or literature or poetry or whatever it is. Lately that has been the thing, and also my videos where I play fighting fantasy game books is something that requires a lot more time, effort, and energy. And those are things that come in a limited supply. So energy, time, and creativity. Those three things come in a limited supply, which means that whenever in my life I have other projects that require at least one of those three things, it is a lot harder for me to have the leftover time, energy, or creativity to make videos, especially if I have other projects that require creativity, because it's one of those things you can't just keep going so much. When it comes to time and energy, you can sort of make time, you can make sure you have the energy, etc. But creativity is something that is harder to control the amount you have spare. At least that's my impression of it. That's how it feels like to me. And that's the main reason. Of course, there are other things too, like holidays. There is like having a cold, which, by the way, I sort of mention this every now and again when I make videos, especially the fighting fantasy ones, that I actually have had more colds than usual over the last year, which has kept me from making videos sometimes as well. But right now, the main thing that is keeping me from making videos is, well, two things. Let's talk about time first, because I have changed something in the way I schedule my days this year that I hadn't really done before, and that is I have made sure that I get more exercise. So the last several years I've not done as much exercise as I would have wanted to, and when I talk about exercise I'm talking about brisk walks, because that is my preferred method of exercise. And while I have every now and again managed to get a decent amount of walking done, it's only the last few months that I've regularly been able to average more than 10,000 steps per day, for the first time, actually, in recent years, after I had a smartphone and actually knew how many steps I took per day. So the last few months, I have taken the time of day, in the sort of mid to late morning, I would say, just before noon, just afternoon, which is the time that in the past I've often used for making my fighting fantasy playthrough videos. Actually, that time of day is now dedicated to going for a long walk. Sometimes with a bit of a break, during the walk, going to a cafe, having an espresso or a cappuccino. But of course, during those breaks, I can't be making videos. So instead, during those breaks, I have been reading more as well. So in addition to reading on the bedside, as I usually do, I've also been reading when I take my coffee break, during my walks. So I've done a lot more reading lately, and that's also one of the reasons why I want to make more videos about books. But again, of course, the time needs to be there for me to make those videos. So even though I managed to find the time to read a lot, it doesn't mean I necessarily find the time to make videos about it. And of course, for those of you who are interested in my videos and in videos about books, you may have noticed there are a few additions to my bookshelf now from last time I made a video. Somebody might spot something around there, and somebody might spot something about here as well. Not hair. You can't spot hair, well, at least not so much on my head. But in the bookshelf behind me, that is, there might be something new, but I'm not going to make videos about that right now, so I'm not going to say anything about it. So I do have more time for reading, but less time for making videos. And the other thing, which I mentioned earlier, of course, time, energy, and creativity. And when it comes to creativity, as I mentioned a few videos ago, when I said that I was going to make more videos about my own poetry, one of the things I mentioned is that I was going to republish my old poetry. And that is actually a big chunk of my creativity gone into that, because what I'm doing is I'm taking my original 3 books of poetry that I have published in English, and also I had some poems lined up for a 4th book, and I'm going through every single of those poems, and I am rewriting many of them. I would say improving them. Sometimes I add new stanzas to them as well. And this is a really time-consuming job, and it's something that requires 100% focus, and it also drains out the creative energy as well, because it requires so much focus. So during my working days, that is one of the things, that's the major thing that I've been doing the last few weeks when I've not been on holiday. I did go on holiday for a week and a half as well. When I'm not on holiday, I spend a lot of time going through old poetry, line by line, word by word, and making improvements, changes, etc., etc. Now, some people think that it's a bit strange to take a poem that you wrote, say, in many cases, I'm talking about 30 years ago. A lot of the poems I wrote are from 1994, which means they're 30 years old. It's more than half a lifetime ago for me, significantly more than half a lifetime. But unlike, say, published music, where once you have a finished version and it's printed, it's made into albums and CDs, etc., etc., with writing it feels a bit different, because as a poet, I feel that as long as I'm alive, every single word I've written that I want to share with the world is something that is still work in progress. And there's one significant change since last time, not since last time, since I wrote many of my poems back in the 90s. Most of them are from the 90s, before I started painting, actually, because again, it's that thing about the limit of creative energy. So I went from using my creative energy for writing to using my creative energy for painting and drawing at some point in the around the millennium. And so the difference from then to now, of course, I'm quite a different person. I've learned a lot from my life and from the past. I also understand a lot better, I think, who I was as a person, and the significance of my life experiences from that time when the poems were written, because they were, many of them, of course, of their time, as it were, in the middle of whatever was going on in my life that prompted me to write them. But at the same time, they were part of a process of understanding those things, and very often um, any attempts at understanding certain things that might have been expressed in them might have been a misunderstanding of things, or a misconception, I should rather say, of things that led to inferior poetry sometimes, slightly too juvenile poetry sometimes, and also at this point in my life, I've also read a lot more poetry by others than I had done at the time. I think I used to, I wouldn't say brag. Brag is not the right word. I used to mention sometimes to anyone who was willing to hear about it, if the subject came up, which it usually didn't, by the way, that I had a phase of my life that lasted quite a long time, from the sort of late 90s up until say 2-3 years ago, where I'm quite sure that I'd actually written more poems than I'd ever read or heard other places. That's no longer the case. Now I definitely read more poems than I've written, which took a while probably, but I've read a lot more. When I started reading again a few years ago, the first thing I really started reading again was poetry, and then of course later I started reading other things, like fiction, Hamlet, and of course I went on to science fiction. I've started rereading Stephen King, as you might see over here as well, and many other things. So, um, so that's a difference now. I think I'm more mature in both in my sensibilities, in my sense of style when it comes to poetry, and of course, I've been able to implement some of the things that I learned not when I started writing poetry so much as a few years after. And when I look at the poems from my earlier days, I can sort of say that, yeah, there's room for improvement there. There's something that I might not have spotted as a possibility. If I change that word, then of course it gets better. So some people think it's a bad thing probably to go about changing old poetry, especially poetry that also has been published before, but it is a continual work in progress as far as I'm concerned. And I always think, as far as I'm concerned, the changes I make are improvements. It brings out more of the potential that was there. So, sorry, this is getting a bit wordy, and I keep going on about this now. But so what I've been doing, just to recap a little bit. So I've taken my first three poetry collections in English, and what would have been the beginning of a fourth one. I'm working my way through every single poem. I think I'm pretty much done now with the first two collections, which was Eternal Moments and The Secret Box, leaving me with The Wind is All Quiet, and also the fourth collection, which was never published, which was A Bird Sang When I Died, which for those of you who might know Emily Dickinson's poetry, I can see there's a reference to Emily Dickinson there. So I'm taking those poems and I'm rewriting them from one after the other, going through every single one, deciding whether it's good enough for republishing now, making changes, making additions. Very often, two stanza poems have been turned into 5 or even 6 stanza poems. That's another story, by the way. So when I started writing poetry in actually in 1992, but I don't really have much of what I wrote from 92 to 94, and the reason is, of course, those were not good at all. It was just a light warm-up until I actually started writing good poems in 1994. So in 1994 until the end of 1996, I was a student and had a lot of time on my hands. Just had to make sure I studied for my exams, etc. So I had time to write more and longer poems as well than I had later. So what happened next was I was in the Navy for a few years, and one of the things I still wrote poetry quite a bit when I was in the Navy, but what I did was that when I went to bed, went to my bunk after my shift in the evening or at night, is I would only have about 4.5 to 5 hours of potential sleep until I had to get up again. So what I started doing was that I decided I should try to write one poem before I fell asleep, unless I was too tired for it, which didn't. Usually, I would write something. So, but that meant that most of the poems I wrote at that time had to be really short. A lot of them are just one stanza long, so like 4 lines, for instance. That's the most common length. And in hindsight, of course, I can look at some of those poems that I wrote at the time that are very short and see that, oh, that's a good beginning of a poem, but it's not a finished poem. There should be perhaps more things added to it to better express whatever I was starting to get into at the time. So that's another thing that has led to me now having a lot of poems that are decent enough that I felt that they could be published and that they have been part of my previous books, but that I now feel I can expand and make longer. Of course, in addition to being exposed to more poetry than when I wrote this last time, I'm also have been exposed to more language, English language, I should say, as well. Obviously, I've been living in Britain now for the last 12 years. I have been exposed myself to more British culture, whether it's TV or what have you, radio, etc. Um, and I've been reading more again. So there's lots of things that these little influences that might make it easier for me to express whatever I want better when I'm writing as well, certainly when it comes to poetry. So all these things add up and mean that I have to go through everything and change it. So at the moment, my status, my plan is that when I've got enough material for 2 poetry collections, that is when I will divide what I have between those 2 collections and publish those 2. And because these will be quite different from my previous ones, I will not give them the same titles as the original ones. They'll be given new titles. My working titles for the first collection and the second, my working title for the first collection at the moment is 1994. I'm just going to put up a sort of a dummy cover there at the moment. 1994, of course, because that's the year that I really started writing poetry that I thought was good. And the second poetry collection is at the moment called Breath of Time, which is a reference to a specific poem. 1994 isn't the title of the poem, but Breaths of Time is the title of a poem. That is the poem that I won a competition with, and I think it's one of my best ones as well. Certainly my best sonnet, I would say. And that's the cover I've got at the moment. Looks like this. And that's the tentative cover, actually. I was thinking of doing something a little bit more elaborate, more illustrative to start with, but I realized that, and also I was thinking of what about illustrations inside the book, because I am an artist. I can do illustrations if I wanted to. But the thing about poetry is that if you want illustrations with it, it has to really, really augment the words. It has to create an even bigger whole than the sum of the parts, I think. generally what you want in a poetry collection is the words to be able to stand for themselves. So the main thing I think for a poetry collection is really focus on the words, making sure that you have a really nice legible font with the right spacing and all that stuff, and make it easy to read in a way that it focuses on what the words say. So that's going to be quite a simple layout, very basic, very, yeah. I'm gonna make it a little bit sort of larger type, I think, than what is standard, even for poetry books, because I want a book that I would want to read myself, and that I probably could read without reading glasses as well. Would be nice. That's my aim anyway. So that's my status. Oh, I didn't actually say the number now. So at the moment I have I want enough for 2 poetry collections, I said, which is I'm thinking around 125 pages worth of poetry per collection is about right. Shouldn't be too much more than that unless it's a collection. And it shouldn't be that much less either, I think. So at the moment I have prepared 150-ish pages of poems, which are, I think, publishing ready, and so I have to go through a bit more to have enough material for 2 books. Excuse me. So that is my plan at the moment. And what else do I want to say? Yeah, of course, when I have worked my way through my poetry collections, or the ones that I already had from before, and the ones that also, so all the poems that I felt were publishing ready in the past, when I worked my way through all of them, sometimes putting some of them in a big folder called works in progress, unfinished poems is what I call it. I do have a long list, an even longer list of poems that I call unfinished. That is to say that I don't feel they're ready for publishing. So it might be one that actually is written from beginning to end. It has the nice final line or whatever, but there's something about it that I feel there's room for improvement, or I don't like it so much, or whatever it is. It's something about it that I feel needs to be, something needs to be done with it, something needs to be added, something needs to be improved before I'm happy with it. And I don't want anyone else to see it until I'm done with it and say that, yeah, I like this one. So when I've finished going through all the ones that I thought were ready for publishing, I will of course have to go through, start going through the ones that I decided were not good enough. And some of them might turn out to be great, of course. I don't know yet, but that of course will also require a lot of work. So that's the story. That is what I've been doing, and that's also the reason all this creative work and this very intense focus, I would say as well, when you are writing poetry, when you are editing poetry, you really have to focus 100%. There's no, you can't do it with anything less than that, because you have to consider, it's a bit like playing chess in a way. You have to consider all possible options and how they change the potential meaning, which one better suits the meaning that you want, which one best suits the lyrical devices that you're using, what fits the rhetoric, what fits the rhythm, what fits the all that stuff. And you have to consider every single option. Is there a way you can turn a sentence around to make it sound better? Is a rhyming word not that perfect, and you sort of think, oh yeah, maybe I want something a bit stronger for the rhyme, and then you have to rewrite 2 lines to get that to fit, but you want to keep the sense of the sentences at the same time. And yeah, it's quite a a convoluted activity sometimes. Sometimes it happens almost by itself and you don't have to think about it, but other times you really have to work hard and be really focused, and it can take hours just getting one stanza right. So yeah, it just varies, it just depends. So that is the sum total, I believe, of what I wanted to talk about today. And I do apologize because this video got way longer than I was expecting it to. So for any one of you who've actually suffered all the way through my ramblings about this, thank you for watching. And all the YouTube stuff, I'm not going to repeat that because you know what to do if you want to support my channel. So yeah, thanks for watching and goodbye for now.